I'm Arthur Roach, only at Parkinson's UK for a little less than a month now. But one of the things I was very excited about in coming to Parkinson's UK was the excellent quality of British science and even more perhaps the outstanding quality of British science presentations. And for that reason, I don't think you need me to summarize 2 minutes after you heard those two excellent talks. But perhaps I can say a couple of words about the kinds of programs that Parkinson's UK plans to put in place to bring this research forward and bring it to the ultimate goal of better treatments and a cure. On the push side that Steve talked about, to take advantage of these early diagnosed patients and the disease subclassifications, we need new treatments to address those subclassifications and to halt the disease progression early in the disease. So on this side, we're already funding basic research into genetics and to molecular and cellular causes of Parkinson's disease, but we plan to instigate new projects that will promote the first steps of that work coming out of the university into finding drugs that can then be taken up by other partners, including industry. On the pull side, we know that the big pharma companies are spending not hundreds of millions, but even billions of pounds every year on research and development in neurological diseases. That can go to any disease, not all to Parkinson's disease. So we have to find ways to make a convincing argument to them that some of that or more of that money should be invested in developing and bringing to the clinic new Parkinson's drugs, and that will involve these international collaborations that Michelle talked about, bringing large amounts of data together with companies, with government regulators, and with the university experts to define how we can use these new biomarkers to define new patient subpopulations and convince them that we can identify patients early enough to justify putting them in clinical trials. So that's all I want to say. I hope you'll hear about some of those programs in the future from, if you're here tonight, you'll probably hear from us again in the future, and maybe some of these programs will be in that information.
Brilliant, thank you, Arthur. And would you have a seat? So we've got an opportunity now for some questions, some discussion. But just while you're thinking about that, actually, just to kind of remind people that Parkinson's UK is not just here about research. We're here to support people as well. And for a number of you, perhaps what you heard tonight might have raised questions about your own symptoms or symptoms of a family member, raised some kind of questions you'd just like to talk to someone about. Well, our helpline, the number here, Parkinson's nurses, other people who really understand about Parkinson's are there wanting to take your call. So please do make use of that service. Okay, so who wants to go first? If you put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. There's a couple on this side, actually. Yes, so.
Recognising the when there was institution, can we just have a little bit of audience participation first? Can those that have got Parkinson's just put up their hands?
If they're comfortable doing that.
And then of those, how many, like me, have got voice problems? I.e. there's a fair number of people with voice problems in the audience. Yeah. What I'd like to do is just put in a plea, therefore, a better balance between the amount we spend on research into the cure aspects. I think what Alistair shows has been absolutely brilliant, but then to neglect the fact that it's going to be, as Sunny, our chair, said, it's going to be our children, our grandchildren are going to benefit from that, not us.
Okay.
So if we can just find some simple ways, some applied research, maybe desktop research, looking at things like voice, balance, all the other things that we see from.
Okay, so a balance between forward-looking kind of cure and something about now and what can be done to help people now. Does someone on the panel want to comment on that? Michelle? Sorry, I've got my...
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I completely agree, and I think one of the things that is very striking is the variation in individuals' access to physiotherapy, to help balance and falls, speech and language therapy. So I think that actually one of the new initiatives that's very exciting is the new UK Parkinson's Excellence Network, which is really aiming to try and iron out those regional differences and train up speech and language therapists who are actually particularly excited about using different newer techniques to treat speech problems in Parkinson's. And I think the potential for our Android phone app to actually be used as a treatment tool as a feedback, where you're recording your voice, playing back how you sound before and after, say, specific exercises, could be very exciting.
I'll just say, I mean, I fully understand the feeling that in the last 10 or 20 years, the focus has been more on cause and genetics and cure. I think that's something we're seeing redressed now. Parkinson's UK has done a survey to try to identify, beyond the cure that everyone wants, what are the most urgent research priorities for patients. And we plan to commission special calls and new programs into those non-motor and other areas. So it is an area we recognize we have to do more in.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's a question up here and then another one from over there.
I've been under the belief for quite some time that stem cell research is going to hold the answer for us. Haven't heard much about that this evening. Is it as important as I believe it is?
So I think I didn't have time to really talk about specifically with the stem cell program that we're doing in Oxford. But actually, one of the interesting things that we can do is put somebody through a very low-risk procedure and get brain cells and dopamine neurons and look at why they die quicker in Parkinson's. This is actually relevant to a lot of people with Parkinson's, because what we're doing is to select people with Parkinson's who have the skin biopsy. We're selecting people who have extremes of phenotype. So that could be somebody who's developing very early memory problems and comparing those stem cells to somebody who actually hasn't got that problem, and looking at cellular models for why this happens and how we can potentially intervene. Going forward, stem cells as a specific restorative treatment to put them back into someone's brain, I think that is the way forward in terms of it's a much better option to deep brain stimulation and to other cellular uses, but we're a bit of a way off being able to actually deliver that and knowing that they're safe to put into someone's brain in the longer term.
Anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Just to say that I still have a lot of hope for stem cell treatments, and if for any of us that were in York at the weekend, we heard Professor Roger Barker talking about both stem cell treatments, gene modification, and kind of how did he describe it? Well, it was GDNF, and it was kind of fertilizer for cells, and he gave quite a positive outlook on that. And just there's been some research at Queen Square quite recently, follow-up of some of the patients that had the very early fetal nigral stem cell grafts. A few of them have done tremendously well with long-term follow-up. There are people, that have had Parkinson's disease, had their grafts done 20 years ago, that are still doing very well. So I think the future is bright for stem cells.
Thank you. And Alistair referred to York then. We had a conference at the beginning of the week, 240 researchers, most of whom funded by Parkinson's UK, just sharing what they're doing, and a fantastic discussion there. Yes, comment, sir.
Questions for you. The first question is that you don't need to convince me that various treatments are necessary for the same condition at different stages. How do you convince the government, the money holders, and Noyce? The second question is that there are drugs like dopamine, where some research workers believe that dopamine may be the cause rather than the treatment, i.e. too much of the drug in the wrong place at the wrong time. Have you any evidence from your presentation that this is making things worse for the patients?
Perhaps if I answer the last question. Certainly, about a decade ago, there was a theory that levodopa was toxic to brain cells and that it was actually causing or triggering Parkinson's. But actually, a lot of that data was based on cellular models and animal models that were given 100-fold in excess doses that would actually be given to a human. And I don't think that that's a very convincing hypothesis, and I think subsequent research has really borne that out. Levodopa is still by far the most effective symptomatic treatment we have for Parkinson's. Importantly, in our current era of cuts and an aging population, it's also the cheapest. So I think that we're going to have to make more and more of a very careful argument as to why patients aren't being given levodopa instead of more expensive alternatives. And the side effect profile, from my personal experience, is that most patients tolerate levodopa much better than some of the alternatives. So I think we're going to have a much better body of evidence that for patient meaningful endpoints, one treatment is a lot better than others. And sort of targeting these sorts of treatments is the work that we're really involved with in Oxford, developing patient-relevant milestones, really.
Just if I could just make the comment on that one about access to treatments. I mean, I was yesterday in the House of Commons talking to the chair of the Health Select Committee about the problems of access to duodopa and asking for an inquiry to be looked into the issue of specialist treatments and met really kind of favourably, actually. And I think part of that was being able to gather lots of evidence from consultants and patients around their experience. So I think there is this sense of working together as a community to make that case powerfully. Where's the microphone? Has someone got the microphone? Okay, we'll take one here and then we'll back up there.
For 25 years I bounced around my bed before I was diagnosed, and it's my 25th wedding anniversary next year, so hopefully my wife has managed to put up with it. If I'd have known that long ago that was such a dramatic biomarker, I'd have been looking for some medication to assist. And I wasn't sure that I was convinced that there's a balance between the identification of the issue and the medication to treat it early when it is identified.
Yes, I think you've raised a very important point, which is that at the moment we have only symptomatic treatments for Parkinson's, but no real disease-modifying drugs that slow down progression. So actually we, as yet, have no proven treatments that would prevent or slow down the conversion of a person with RBD to Parkinson's. The data on these RBD risk has really only emerged in the last 5 to 10 years. So I would say that is something that has been a growing body of evidence, but there are many people who are not very well aware of it. It's very easy to treat RBD symptomatically, but my argument is that by getting together large groups of people with RBD, we can start to actually test drugs now that actually would delay or prevent the conversion to ultimate Parkinson's. But currently, none of those studies have been done.
Certainly in the Alzheimer's field, you see people have, there have been antibodies and other treatments that have been tested in later stage patients where they didn't have an effect, and now they're going to identify the early patients, often genetic patients, to get the very earliest patients to see if the drugs work there. So I think we're going to see the same thing in Parkinson's, where drugs which may have not worked at the later stage because it was too late could now be tested in these very early patients when we have a high confidence that here's a group that's going to become definite Parkinson's in a short period of time. So that might be a new era in Parkinson's drug testing. It will require getting the companies on those drugs to see the opportunity and see there's a potential there, and see they'll eventually that patients will have access to their drugs. So it's a many-factored, unfortunately, problem.
I mean, my concern is that this particular area of study is very unattractive for drug companies, because you might have to wait 15 years of actually giving an individual a treatment drug to actually see a benefit. And that kind of long time frame and the monitoring needed is very expensive. And therefore, but that's the kind of time period we need. Unless 5 years. Unless we have a separate surrogate marker. But the real gold standard of outcome in this trial is not really going to be a scan or a blood test. It's actually going to be numbers of people that convert to Parkinson's.
Okay, I think the microphone is...
It is very encouraging to very encouraging to see fundamental research being done for identifying Parkinson's and long-term treatment. But for most of us here, I think would like to know what sort of therapies are available for relieving some of these symptoms, and also would be very interested to know of the situation about diet and nutrition treatment and other things like exercises and so forth, how it is relevant and how what sort of research has been done. And I suppose only empirical studies have been taken place. I don't think any clinical studies I have seen being published in the Parkinson's magazine. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, there's lots of studies being published over the last couple of years showing the positive benefits of exercise on Parkinson's, notably things like dance and yoga and Tai Chi, and these are things that we advise in the clinic as well. In fact, I put those things of parallel importance alongside the standard drug treatment for Parkinson's. Those trials are largely affected by the same limitations as the drug trials, which is that you measure the effect of the intervention based on those semi-quantitative scales. So you don't know if they're really helping the underlying disease or just easing the symptoms. I guess a point I do want to make is I've been talking very much about early identification and intervening before a diagnosis. That's not because I think all hope is lost once you have a diagnosis. I actually think that those people pre-diagnosis actually represent a very, if you like, pure form of Parkinson's disease that's not been affected by other medications and potentially by other diseases. And if you can show an effect in them, then you know your drug's working. And then you can use it in people that have a diagnosis and are already on a range of other medications and have other diseases. So that's where I think the value of them lies for all of you.
A quick question for you, Michelle. On your graph, where you had the clusters and the 5 groups, have you linked those groups to age, either age of the individual in the test and or age of actually being diagnosed with Parkinson's? Yeah. And I wonder if there was any common theme of results there, just so we can try and put people within those groups.
So firstly, just to say, this data is very preliminary. It's literally hot off the press. We're looking at different cluster models currently, but we're very interested to see where age falls in. And there are some differences in the groups. The tremor dominant tend to be a little bit older, but there are some other features. And I think it would be premature for me to give you very definitive answers really to that at this stage. But we will hopefully have a publication out in the next 6 to 12 months that will be more definitive.
Clinically, it feels right, though, doesn't it? Looking at those data you described, it feels like things that you recognise in the clinic.
It's people you recognise in clinic. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question in the cheap seats at the top, I think.
Hi, finally saw us. There's one going back to both the studies. Just being a son of some lady who's got Parkinson's and also having dyslexia, a lot of those points you pulled out for actually your studies of classic things that dyslexics can have, that when you're doing the motor neurons on the keyboard, a lot of dyslexics will get halfway through that and suddenly go, what? How are you ruling that out of your studies? As also I know, as I do a lot of climbing down in Reading, so some of them will be your patients, people who've had Parkinson's for a long time who can control it because they've kept an active lifestyle and haven't fallen into the classic Parkinson's thing of, I can't do that, because I've seen it very much with my mother who, as soon as she got it, and then she went to the little group. I can't do this. They all say I can't do it until someone gives them a big kick and go, yes, you can go dancing, you can do swimming. So I guess it's sort of 2 questions there.
So I guess in terms of dyslexia, we do take a very detailed sort of past medical history and a developmental history, but it's possible that we are having people in our clinic who do have a mild form of dyslexia that's not been diagnosed through their childhood and adolescence. We also, though, try to adjust in any of our memory and dexterity tests for things like social history, occupational history. We look at education, and we look at pre-morbid intelligence as well, which through a reading test called the NART, National Adult Reading Test, gives an idea of pre-morbid intelligence. So we try and look at all of these things as potential covariates for what we're studying. And we do also record about exercise in our constipation questionnaire, where a person actually has to write down how much exercise they've done in the last week. It is basic, though.
First of all, thank you both for 2 very thought-provoking lectures. I think the more we learn, the more we know how little we already know. So a question for each of you, please. Dr. Noyce, you seem to be, I think it's your dream that eventually everybody will have a routine, a test for Parkinson's, so as a routine. So what sort of timescale in the future might be we looking at that? And what sort of age would people have it? Because, of course, early onset Parkinson's, I think, is becoming more and more familiar. My own husband got it when he was in 40s, but now I know he probably had it when he was about 30. The other one, Michelle, you were saying about the earlier we can find this, then we can stop it, as it were. But it's progressive, it's degenerative. How on earth is there a possibility, even if we were to do that now, to stop it?
So, well, I'll take my question first, if I may. I think from the graphs that I showed you that the rate that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is increasing, but the rate that Parkinson's increasing should cause concern from a public health point of view. Those rates are fairly dramatic, and of all the diseases that we have, we're not impacting on those at all. But I think we can. I think there's lots in the published literature that suggests that certain people, so that people on certain types of drugs seem to be at lower risk of Parkinson's. And actually, those drugs may actually have benefit if they were applied very widely. So when you do go to your GP, they often measure blood pressure, cholesterol, and check you for diabetes and take a smoking history. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is they're trying to guess how likely you are to have a heart attack over the next 15 to 20 years. And actually, our battery of tests, it wouldn't necessarily need to involve the smell test, but it could just be a very quick screening questionnaire where we say, oh, you have a family history, and you've developed constipation and depression. Okay, that would trigger something, and then we'd give a drug that's probably already available to try and reduce your risk.
To get back to your question, Parkinson's is progressive, it is degenerative, but even if we had a treatment that might give you 5 years of your life without Parkinson's that you would otherwise have had, to me that's a meaningful delivery, and I would imagine for most people here that would also be the case.
I think also the apparent responders in stem cell therapy, if that could be given at an early stage, that's a long-lasting benefit that seems to stop the disease for many, many years in those patients if those small numbers are really telling us something. So I'm not that pessimistic. I think we need to find the right patients and the right treatments and test them properly.
Thank you. Can I just ask about the different groups that you found in Parkinson's? A very interesting classification emerging. Do you feel there's actually an underlying different mechanism in the Parkinson's? And I ask this particularly, we've discussed about treatments, and you've mentioned treatments coming up and re-looking at them. I mean, if there's one mechanism, but just different bits of the brain affected is why we get different manifestations, it wouldn't make any difference. But it would make a lot of difference, of course, if there's a different actual mechanism.
So I agree. I mean, it's tempting, very tempting to speculate. I wonder whether the different groups actually represent different stages of disease burden with differential areas of the brain being affected. And that's responsible for the different manifestations you're seeing. But of course, we don't know that. What we're trying to do now is looking at brain imaging and metabolic patterns to see whether that differs with our phenotypic groups. Is there a biomarker in blood? Are there genetic predictors that vary between these phenotypes? But this is something that we're literally just embarking on, and realistically, it will take years of work, careful work, to really come up with these sort of meaningful conclusions.
And just a last question, I'm afraid, from the person who's got the microphone on this side. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it the case that there are currently no medications available which slow down the progression of the disease? And the reason I'm asking that is because I was diagnosed 4 years ago, but it was suspected 2 years before that. And I'm in the lucky, very, very slow deterioration category. I have decided I don't need medication at present, and as long as I can manage without it, I will continue to manage without it. But I read somewhere on the internet fairly recently that there was some paper or other that had suggested that if you did my choice, if I exercised my choice of not taking anything, I would end up with faster progression than if I had taken some of the current medication. So that's why I'm asking about it.
I mean, okay, so if we take the classic. It goes back to a previous gentleman's point as well about whether the kind of mainstay drug in Parkinson's, levodopa, is toxic. There is a study that I think was reported either earlier this year or at the end of last year, and unless I got the complete wrong end of the stick, it was a study in Africa which followed up a group of people over a large group of people over about 5 years, people that were treated with levodopa versus those that weren't. And they were the same at baseline, and after 5 years, they were exactly the same, i.e. levodopa hadn't done anything to either improve the prognosis or make things worse. My personal feeling, as I've said, is that we do actually have drugs that modulate the underlying disease process. The issue is that we've never shown them in a randomized controlled trial, which is the standard way with which we measure drug effect. So there's lots in the epidemiological literature that suggests that things like non-steroidals, calcium channel blocking drugs, maybe some of the diabetes drugs, and statins may actually reduce your risk, but at the moment these things have never been shown in the constructs of a randomized trial, which is what they need to be done.
From the 14 years or so that I've been looking after people with Parkinson's, my general kind of experience is that people who are fitter, who do have a high level of exercise and who maintain that, seem to be protected in some way. That's a very crude sort of anecdotal thing, but the evidence is now emerging for the benefit of exercise and Pilates and Tai Chi. For example, I mean, there are other very important interventions, not just medications, like mental training, keeping your mind active, keeping yourself engaged, able to do Sudoku, that have been shown to protect against future memory impairment and dementia. So I think there's a lot we don't understand about the brain, and I think there probably are disease-modifying things out there, but we haven't yet really tested them in a validated way.
Did you want to comment, Arthur?
No, I mean, I think I agree, with Alistair's comments that there are things that have been shown in epidemiological literature that suggest protection. Some of those are being tested now in proper trials. So that's one of the things that makes an exciting field now. I don't think they're going to have huge effects like we've seen in some reports, as I said, with stem cell therapy. So there's still, I think, need for more beyond that.